So, hello everyone. Welcome to another indie author interview. I am here today with Sariah Wilson, who is the author of A Tribute to Fire. So, thank you so much for joining me today.
Much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So, let's get right into it. Tell me a little bit about your journey to become an author, and what your path to publication was.
That is a long story. I don't know if I'll try to shorten it a little bit. Essentially, what happened is my oldest son was diagnosed as being autistic when he was 3 years old. And there were just like treatments and therapies that were so out of our reach. And this was like over 20 years ago. So it wasn't really covered by insurance. And I was kind of like thinking about it, praying about it, meditating, what do I do? And I got this answer, it was like, write a book. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. I'm not going to do that.
Hmm.
I never had thought I would be a writer. I've always loved reading. I've enjoyed writing, but it just wasn't something that I thought I would do.
Hmm.
And some local people got together, and like I said, this is back before GoFundMe or anything like that, to help raise money for him. And they donated stuff, and we had this big multifamily garage sale. And so I sent out press releases to the local papers, hoping to get them to come out and cover it so we get some people there. And this reporter came to the house, and I opened the door, and she goes, "Before I come inside, I have to ask you, are you a writer?" And I was like, that is such a weird question. Why would you ask me that? And she's like, because your press release was so well written, I just assumed that you were a writer yourself. And it was like heavens parting, the light bulb. I'm like, okay, I got it. So yeah, I started writing for a really small regional publisher that nothing really happened. It didn't go very well. And then I had two more kids, and then indie became really big. And I was very, very excited about that. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I saw it talked about for like 2 weeks. I'm like, you can write whatever you want. You get to bypass the gatekeepers, right? So I did do that for a while, and then, but there's like how many millions of books on Amazon? Like getting found is very hard. And people were like, "Oh, cream will rise to the top." And I thought this book that I'd written, I it had great reviews, like it was doing well. And I'm like, why isn't this happening? I thought, so what do I want to do? What's my goal? And what I thought I wanted to do was I thought you need to be with Amazon, right? Like who can publish you more, like publicize you more than Amazon? That's where the, big publishers are doing their advertising at as well. I thought that's kind of my dream, but didn't see any way of like making that happen. And then I wrote this book, and it's called Royal Date, and I did it in about a month. And the day I finished, there was this announcement of this program called Kindle Scout. And it was kind of like American Idol, but for books. So you could put up your cover and your first chapter, and people could go in and say, I think this sounds interesting. I'd like to read this. But just because you got votes doesn't mean anything. It's just Amazon was like kind of just looking, and it was very weird. But like when I saw that, I'm like, I'm gonna win that. It was just sort of this knowledge. I don't know. Like I don't want to sound like it was arrogance because it absolutely wasn't, but it was just sort of like this, oh, this is going to happen. And I did. I entered and I won. Was one of the first 10 winners. And the woman who ran the program said, "Why did you enter?" I said, "Because I want to work with Montlake, which is their romance house."
Hmm.
And next thing I know, I'm getting a phone call from the director of Montlake. And I thought it was just like a networking, get your foot in the door, meet them kind of a thing. And in the phone call, she goes, "Well, I'm going to offer you a 2-book contract." And I'm like, "You're going to what now?" I was like in complete shock because this is not how things happen. So people tell me your publishing story. That's my publishing story. I started working with them, and I've been with them for 10 years.
Wow.
They helped me get my agent. So yeah, I've been with them for a long time, but that's how it happened.
That's a really cool story. I think it's a really unique story, and it kind of starts from, like you said, kind of, grassroots, just really just trying to, raise money for your family, and then it kind of just transformed into this. That's really cool. And so for Tribute to Fire, how did you write it? Did you plot? Did you pants? Did you plans? What did you do to write it?
Oh, this is another one. It was also like probably just a story of my life. We had a medical emergency. And we had to pay out of pocket insurance reviews to cover it. We couldn't fight, which takes so long to fight them.
Hmm.
And so we took a second out on our house. And my husband was very worried. He's like, "I love you. I support you. How are we going to pay this?" And I said, "I'm going to write a book." And I write rom-coms. I write sweet rom-coms. And the amount of money that we needed, I was not going to get that from that contract. And so I thought, well, for years, when I go to podcasts like this, someone say, "If you weren't writing romance, what would you be writing?" I'm like, "Oh, fantasy." Like, not even a question. That's what I grew up with. I love fantasy and I love romantasy. It's like my favorite thing ever. Like, I'm so glad it's a thing. Like, I'm so glad it's having its moment. I hope it stays. But I'm like, I've always wanted to. And I'd had this idea for A Tribute to Fire because I was writing a rom-com, and I was going to use a line of dialogue about Cassandra from Greek mythology. And she was the prophetess who would always see the future, but nobody believed her.
Hmm.
And I'm like, am I using this correctly? So I looked it up on Wikipedia, and I'm just kind of reading about her and then what happened to her after the war. And what happened is someone came and assaulted her in Athena's temple, and Athena was furious about it and said, "You need to punish him." And the other Greeks were like, "That's what men do. What do you care?" So that's why like the Odyssey happens because Athena blew them all off course and like wrecked their ships because she was so furious about this. And then she demanded, and his name was Ajax the Lesser, and he was from Locris, and she said, "You have to send two maidens every year to replace the priestess that you took from me." So every year, Locrian maidens went across the ocean, and they had to serve. And then it said, and they would serve in the temple, but only if they made it there alive. And I'm like, why wouldn't they make it there alive? Well, what's
Mhm.
this? And so I started looking, and there's not very much information about it. We know it was a real event. It happened for 1,000 years. We have all kinds of mentions of it in histories. We found there's like a stone obelisk that had writing about it, and it's just been fascinating. But like I said, it's not something that's been studied very well. And I'm like, this is so interesting. I'm like, okay, so they have to go over, and the men in the city can chase them, they can kill them, and it can hurt them. And I'm like, so what if I have a princess that needs to go over there and get something? And it just kind of started spiraling from there. Like, what can I do? And so she's going to train, and I just kept thinking and thinking about it, and I've been thinking about it probably for, gosh, I would say like 3 years
Mm.
before I decided to sit down and write it. So I had really, really thought this through and what was going to happen. Um, I I'm not a I thought I was like a plotter, and then I talked to my other friends who are, and I am not one like at all. I'm like, I don't do any of that. I'm a pantser, but what I do is like I'll be working and then I'll think of a line of dialogue for something later in the book and I'll write it down. But then I never know where it goes and it's a mess and it makes it hard. But so yeah, this was very much just me sitting down and pretty much not knowing one day to the next what was going to happen. Having a general idea, but not really knowing and just writing, and that's what came out.
And I mean, I think what I loved most, like Greek mythology and history and all of that is like my favorite thing, like on earth. And so I think that's why I was like immediately drawn to your book, which is just great. And so you said romantasy is like your favorite genre. So what do you like about writing in it? Because you said you also write rom-coms. So those are two different genres. So what do you like about the
Absolutely.
romantasy?
Um, I'm at a point where I think I have something like 25 rom-coms out. So I've been doing it for a while. And what nobody tells you, and I wish they would, is that it gets harder. I thought it would get easier. It does not. Because you're looking at things like, have I told this story before? Have I already done this arc? Have I told these jokes before? Because, in a rom-com, the jokes are so important. It's my sense of humor. I'm going to make the same jokes, and your readers will tell you.
Hmm.
You already used this one. So it kind of becomes more stressful. And it was more like trying to construct it and have the scaffolding there that would work to make the story. And it would just be, it was more difficult to write. This was like just sitting down and just flowed out of me. Like I wrote, it was 155,000 words and I did it in 39 days. And then book two, I did it 176,000 in 31 days. Like it just,
Oh my gosh.
maybe it'll change if I have 20 romantasy books and then it'll be like the same problem, right? Like, am I
Yeah.
doing the same thing? Um, but I think just because it was so different from what I normally had to do, and there were no restrictions. Like you talked about loving Greek mythology and history. Like when I was in sixth grade, I was on the language arts field team, and my expertise was Greek mythology because that's how much I've always loved it. And I was a history major in college. So when I was getting ready to write this book, I got, an ID for the local university, and I went and was checking out academic books. I got in touch with all kinds of professors of antiquity, and I had one. And I was like, "Here's the books I've read about the Locrian maidens. Can you suggest anything?" He goes, "I'm pretty sure you know more about this than I do at this point." Um, so I was reading the history and I kind of know what time I wanted it to be. It's about 100 BC. It's an alternate Greek universe. But I hate the clothing the women wear in that time period. That probably sounds so silly, but I was like, I don't like what they're wearing. I'm like, wait, this is a fantasy novel. I can do whatever I want. I'm not writing history. So there's so many ways that history informs this book. Like I have a lot of things that happen that are based on real history just because they're just so cool. Um, but also it allowed me the freedom to say, I don't have to follow anything. This is my pretend world and I can do whatever I want in it. And that is really freeing and really fun.
Mm. But I like that you have a good blend of like historical fact and then, having the fantasy. Like I think that that is what makes it really unique in that, you found something that you're like, "Oh, like this isn't really explored. Like we don't really have too much, but so I'm gonna put my own spin on it." I think that's the coolest thing. And so, what do you need in your writing space to stay focused? How do you write a book in 31 days? Where do you write a book?
I write it in my room. I sit
Mhm.
on my bed, which you're not supposed to do. Like, don't ever be, yeah, I work from my bed. Um, I just is more comfortable, and I have snacks next to me. I like don't recommend my writing style, and I didn't know this about myself. I was a few years ago diagnosed with ADHD. Like
Hmm.
all four of my kids have it, and
Relatable.
and I was kind of like, wait a second, like I do this stuff too. And the psychiatrist was like, oh yeah, had no idea, right? I thought this is
Mhm.
how people's brains work. I didn't know that. So, I think for me, the procrastination element where I know that I can write a 90,000 word book in 30 days. I know. So even if I try to start early, my brain says, nope, nope. So that's part of why I write, I think, in a short amount of time. Um, but I'm also at a point in my life where my two youngest children are teenagers. They're like a junior and senior in high school. So they don't need me the way that like a toddler would. And so I have the time to really devote to this, that dad's here, they can take care of themselves, which really helps in doing this stuff. And for me, it's just sort of this is what I do all day. Like, I know that people go down, like, I write 500 words a day, and that's so cool. But like, I would lose the story, I think. It helps me to be in it all the time. It's like all I'm thinking about. Um, that for me helps the process. I don't recommend this process. It's terrible. It's very stressful. If you can write 500 words a day, please do that. Um, because I think it makes your life better and easier. But this is what works for me. This is what works for my brain. So it's kind of like this is how I have to do it.
Hmm. And I mean, I have ADHD as well. I was late diagnosed, like I'm an adult, and didn't know, like, I think that that's a really great piece that didn't know that other people's brains don't work like that. Like I'm neurodivergent. I'm not neurotypical. So I don't like I read very fast. And people
Yeah,
are like, "Are you really reading the book?" Like, and I'm like, "Yes, I'm really reading the book. My mind just works like that. I have to like consume all the time." So I totally understand, that piece about I mean, I drafted my first novel like on Saturdays in like 3 hour increments, like took me a month and a half, like just on Saturdays. And that's how I wrote it because that's what
yeah,
I needed to do for my process. So yeah, the words a day, I can't do that. I write when I am in my space, when I'm like ready to do that.
yeah.
Um, and so I know you mentioned procrastination, but other than that, what is something that gets in your way as a writer? What's your kryptonite?
Right now, like I think social media, again, now I'm realizing because of the dopamine hits you get from you having
Yes.
ADHD,
Yeah.
the things getting likes, and I need to like wean myself off of that. But I will often find myself picking up my phone and going, nope, nope, and like, having to put it back down. I do find that very distracting. I think I I stayed away from it for so long, and then I just got into it. And now I'm like, it's bad. I wish I was doing it less. And I was actually kind of glad that TikTok was going away, and now it's back apparently.
I know.
So I'm like,
It's
this will be better. No.
no, just kidding.
I mean, did you know that TikTok is designed for like ADHD brains? Like it's
I didn't
designed
know
to keep
that,
you
but I
enthralled. Yeah.
can see that because we do
Yeah.
scroll like very easily.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting. So yeah. But that's the one thing that gets in my way, I think.
Mm. And that's definitely a thing for me too. And I have this app, I forgot who told me about it now. One of the authors that I've interviewed. And let's see, what is it called? I think it's called Flora.
Yeah.
And it so like you set it for a certain amount of time and like what you're gonna do. And then if you open your phone and like don't like close your phone within like 30 seconds or something or 10 seconds, it kills your forest. So like you can grow a forest and it's really I don't know, I love the dopamine hit, right? Because I'm like,
Yeah.
ooh, my forest is big now. So that helped me. I really wish I could remember who recommended it to me. But I think it's a good app. It's a good app for your phone, because that happens to me too. So let's go into talking about Tribute to Fire specifically. So if you had to describe that book in one sentence or less, what is that sentence?
It's always
I
so
know,
hard. I need to do a 20-page
150,
document about, yeah.
right? Like
Um,
155,000
yeah.
words in
Um,
sentence.
I'd say a princess of a dying nation enters a death race to find a relic to save her people and has to deal with a very mysterious and charming enemy sailor.
I love it. Perfect, perfect. Um, and who was the most, and I mean, who was your favorite character to write?
Gosh, that's hard because like I love them all. Demaratus is probably my favorite. He's her battle master, and it's because I based him on Spartans. And I like
Hmm.
literally before this was downstairs talking to my husband about some of my favorite Spartan stories. Um, just because they were I just love everything about them. So, yeah, I just they're kind of their outlook on life, the things they would say, and so there are actual Spartan quotes, in the story, and actual Spartan stories, from history in there because they're just so great, and I just love their outlook, and I thought it was great for, my female main character to have that going into this fight. So, being trained by someone like this who they win every fight, so I really enjoy him. I think he's a lot of fun, and to the point that I'm like. I think he's going to come back in book three. Like I thought, his job was kind of done, but I'm going to bring him back just because I love him. So
I'm happy to hear that because I really enjoyed that character as well. And I think if it's not broke, don't fix it. So if like there are some things that really happened that are, really quotable and good stories, then, repurposing them and in fantasy.
yeah,
And so on the flip side of that, who is the most challenging character to write and why?
I will tell you, I think it's almost always for me my point of view main character, which is almost always my female character,
Hmm.
and I think because it's such a fine line that if I had a man doing what she's doing, he'd be the sexy shadow daddy, right? And he'd be awesome, and people would love him. But you have a woman do it, and suddenly it's like, oh, I don't like her. She's unlikable. So I really and truly feel like there is a very fine line that you have to walk where you can have someone like when I was writing book two, my developmental editor came back and she's like, Leah is so angry. Like, we need to tone this down. And I said, of course she's angry. All the stuff that happened to her. She's very mad. And I did it because I know that other people are not as petty as me and hold on to anger as long as I do. So that's more of one of my traits. But it's good to have these editors to tell you that kind of stuff, 'cause again, your brain doesn't work the way everybody else's does. But um, just it was so hard because I see her anger and I see her wanting to do these things, but we still have to make her relatable and rootable, and you want to read her story and you want to stay with her. And if she's so awful that you can't do that, I mean, I wish we could write, sassier, angrier female main characters. Maybe that'll come someday, but um yeah, I think we have to be careful sometimes in doing that.
And I think you point out something really great is about using your editors. And there are so many different kinds of editors, right? Like you
Yeah.
mentioned developmental, then, you have the line copy and, then you also have different kinds of readers, right? Like alpha, beta, arc, like all those different kinds of readers. And some like I know that you kind of mentioned like of course she's angry. Like yes, like that's kind of what I was trying to get across, but like um is it difficult sometimes to take that feedback and to kind of be like, "Oh, okay, like this works for me, but maybe it doesn't work for everyone."
Yeah, 'cause I think I get defensive, because
Yeah.
you put yourself in these characters, your own feelings and emotions and things, and that makes it more difficult. But I think that's why it's really good to find editors that you vibe with. Like in the beginning, especially when I was indie, I remember working with editors who were like they were also authors, and so they were like, "This is how you should write this." And I'm like, "That's not how I want to tell the story. You're not looking at what I want to do. You're looking at what you would do because you're also a writer." So you need to find editors that do not do that. You want editors that are looking at your voice and your story and want to make it the best that it can be. And so the development editor I've worked with her now for, I don't know, like maybe 6 or 7 years.
Mm.
She's amazing. And she's my compliment sandwich. She's like, the book is so great. Here's the 40 million things you need to fix, but it was so great.
Hmm.
She's very good about it. But she, sometimes I might get a little upset. Like one of the things I do is I'll read the editorial letter and then I'll walk away. And I wait maybe a couple of days and then I can come back to it and I'm fine. But with like Charlotte, I just trust her so much that even if I'm kind of like, I know she's probably right.
Hmm.
So sometimes I push back. There are things that I have pushed back against that I think I was right about, and I did turn out to be right. I wrote a rom-com where it's all in the female main character's point of view, but I started every chapter with a text from the love interest. So that's really where you got to see his voice. And they said, these are unnecessary, take them out. I said, I really want these in there. You get to see his sense of humor, his romantic comments. I want to keep them. And I fought and I got to keep them. And you know how, like in Kindle, how people can highlight their favorite passages? Every single highlight are his texts. I thought readers loved it. So I'm
Hmm.
glad that I held on to that. So I think you kind of have this balancing act of, yes, take your editor's feedback, but you also have to figure out what works for you and the story that you want to tell. And that also just comes with experience, right? Like I'm more likely to kind of push back a little bit now than I was in the beginning because I have more experience. I've been doing this for a while. So yeah, you kind of have to find that. It's a hard balance to find. But yeah, if you find editors that work well with you, like gosh, worth their weight in gold.
Hmm. Absolutely, completely agree. And so from this book, do you have a favorite scene or a favorite quote?
I mean, my favorite quote is probably one for many, 'cause it just like drives the whole story. So I love that one. A favorite scene in book one, I
Hmm.
have to think. It's probably the night of the festival. I I really had fun writing that one, because I typically write sweet. And so this is much steamier than I normally write. I mean, I think probably for a typical romance reader, like, nothing's happening. What is this? You know, but I'm like, but it was very steamy for me. So it was fun to kind of explore that. And so in doing something different than I had ever done before. And book two is like so much more. Um, so that's something to look forward to. But yeah, that was a fun thing to write.
Mm. And I think it's kind of it's fun, but it's also like nerve-wracking to go outside of your comfort zone, right? Like if
Yeah,
you're usually used to Sweden, I I talked about that with my alpha reader, and I was like, I was trying to balance like I like reading really spicy stuff, but like I don't think that that fits the vibe of the book. And so
right.
it's like balancing like what I like, but also like what makes sense with the characters, right? So it sounds like that was a natural progression for the characters and they were ready for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, the physical connection for them is so important in the story. It's not always for me, but in this story it is. And I saw a review on Goodreads, and I know you're supposed to look at Goodreads, but what a horny idiot. And I'm like, which one? You know, there's so many people this could be referring to. But I'm like, it's true. So yeah, I thought because it is driving it, and I do think that you have to take it into account when you're writing your stories. Like you said, this story does not call for spice. This story calls for something sweeter. But yeah, definitely, I think being true to that, because I have read books where it feels like scenes are just inserted, like they don't go with the
They don't
flow of the
fit.
book, and they feel like just this, well, you gotta have spice, and so we're just gonna stick that in there. And I'm like, this doesn't work. Like this doesn't match the rest of the story. So you have to be careful with that.
Absolutely. And so, when we write characters, sometimes we have like, aesthetic boards or certain people, in the world that kind of inspire what they look like. Is there anybody that exists that inspires your main characters at all?
Yeah, this is a
You said that a little sadly.
yeah, this is my Raylo story. I'm a
Oh, I can
I found
totally
out
see that.
yeah, I found out my hyperfixation. Found out about that. That mine's Raylo, just so you guys know. Um, but yeah, so in my head, I'm seeing Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley, right? That's but younger, you know. So, um, yeah, that's what I pictured.
And I asked that question just because, like, after I do an interview, I like to go back and read the book again, and I like to imagine the characters as that. So I'm super excited to go back and
Well,
read
I
it.
mean, and there's things too. You'll see like Quinn is Rose from Star
Mhm.
Wars. So I'm like, you'll get some stuff like that where you see little things in there that there's little. And my development editor has never seen Star Wars, and so I said, "Did you see this stuff in here?" And she's like, "Nope." I'm like, "So there's Easter eggs for fans, but other people don't even see it." So I'm very happy about that.
Ah, I love that. I love that. Okay, so let's go into the last part of the interview, and it's just asking questions that are just fun and lighthearted. So, other than reading and writing, what do you like to do in your free time? What are your hobbies? What are your
So
hyperfixations right now?
social media, right?
Yes.
I'm a huge like I love TV and movies. Oh my gosh, I could like just sit all day. I'm a gamer. I play World of Warcraft right now. Um, Spend time with my family. I have a grandson who's so cute and fun, and my cats. But yeah, I am an introvert. I do not like to go out of my house. So I do not want to go hiking, and I do not want to go, bowling or anything like that. So I guess I'm kind of boring in that aspect, but yeah, I'm a total homebody.
I relate to that too. I mean, we're having like a snowstorm, and it's like weird, like when you're like forced to stay inside, it feels different. It's like, no, now I want to go out. But no, you can't because there's snow and wind.
Yeah.
My favorite question of the whole interview, I open up my Goodreads every time. Who are some authors or books that you would recommend?
Gosh, I will tell you, my favorite author is Maeve Binchy. Um, she's an Irish author who doesn't, and I love happy ending. That's why I write romance. And she does not write happy endings, but the way she uses language, I adore her. And she died a few years ago. And I remember being so sad because I was like, I'm never going to get another story from her.
Mhm.
Because I love her brain. I love the way she writes. She's one of my favorites. I love Amy Tan. Her stuff's great. She hasn't written in a while, but her early stuff I love, like The Kitchen God's Wife. Um, Terry Brooks, I'm a huge fan of when it comes to fantasy. I grew up on him. Yeah, I mean, I met him at my college 25 years ago, and he signed books for me, which I still have.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, I love his stuff. And Sophie Kinsella, of course, when it comes to rom-coms, she
I
is the
love
master.
Sophie.
She's the queen. Yeah, you can't get better than that, I think. Like she's someone I read her books and I like want to weep, you know. I'm like, you're so clever. You're so clever. So yeah, that's some of my favorites.
I love that. I'm trying to think. Oh, Finding Audrey. I read that one. Um, and then of course Confessions of a Shopaholic,
Yeah.
which they made into a movie, which is kind of really awesome.
Yeah.
Um, if you had to give advice to an aspiring author or a younger you, what would that advice be?
My advice to everyone who asks me this is read. I am surprised at how many people tell me I've always wanted to write a book, but they don't read. I'm like, how can you want to write a book? It's very weird to me. So read. You will learn more from reading, I think, that you're realizing that you would just kind of, it'll feel familiar to you because you've read so much. And
Mm,
I think if you can join a writer's group in the beginning, I think that's helpful to kind of learn things and reading craft books like on Stephen King's, on writing.
on writing, yep.
Yeah, I think those things that really help you, and there's so much, especially in the romance field. Like, there's so
Mhm.
many authors who've written just wonderful books about things that you don't realize. Like, you can't head hop, right, in scenes. I didn't know that. I read it and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's true, huh? So you learn those things you don't really know. You learn the technical stuff. But I think that's very helpful because we think we can just do it. And I think you need to learn a little bit before you give it a try.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I would do the research and maybe join a writing group, and I think that's helpful.
And it also, fosters like a sense of camaraderie, right? Like especially if you're starting out indie, it's pretty lonely and you have to figure everything out on your own,
Yeah,
but I think that I mean book talk for sure, but also, Bookstagram, those communities that like authors have found each other and like been able to support each other and like promote each other and give advice on like even I was like, I don't even know how to format my book. And they're like, oh, these are the two programs, right?
right.
Or more, there's more, but the two main programs, right? And it's like I wouldn't have known that if I didn't reach out to them. So definitely really good advice to find your tribe. Um, and I know that you said that when you write, sometimes it just flows out of you. Does music at all help it flow out of you?
Absolutely. I have music playing. I have a playlist for this series and I turn it on. And I think that helps my brain. Like, I also light a candle, next to
Yeah.
me. And
Yeah.
I think it's like, okay, we're getting ready. We're doing this. Something else that I find really helpful in Dave Wolverton, he also wrote as Dave Farland. He wrote like The Courtship of Princess Leia. But he was this author that's been in the industry forever. And he talked about one of the things that he thought was really important was being able to hypnotize your readers. I'm like, that's very strange. What are you talking about? And so he's talking about how he sent this book off to his agent. The agent gave it to an assistant and said, go read this. And the assistant took it home and she's reading it and she realizes she had to pee. And she's like, I'll just finish this next chapter. And it just kept happening, right? She's gonna get up and go to the bathroom and one more chapter and one more chapter. And then somewhere around 3 or 4 in the morning, she realizes she's given herself a urinary tract infection because she's been waiting for so long to go to the bathroom.
Oh
So
gosh.
she had to go to the hospital, where she laid in the hospital bed and continued to read the story. He's like, that's what you want. You're looking for readers that do that. And he said, and part of the way that you do that is if you, as the author, get hypnotized as well. And he said, so what I've always done is when I start writing for the day, I go back and read everything I wrote the day before. And I'm reading it and I'm in it and it pulls me in the story. And I've actually had to tell my husband, like, do not bother me because it's like he's pulling me out of something. And like, it's so hard to start over again. Like, I'm like, you're messing up my flow of what I'm doing. So I think when you can get really invested in your story and you're really just like reading it and you're there, um, if you get entranced by it, I think your readers can too.
Hmm. I I mean I think loving what you write and writing the book for you, right?
Yeah.
Um, is a really big thing as well. Is that playlist public or is that just for you?
I usually keep them private because people make fun of my music taste because I'm very basic. So I'm not listening to cool indie bands, like some of the other authors are. But yeah, I usually keep it private just so people won't mock me. And sometimes because it's spoilery. I have songs I listen
That's
to that if I
true.
told you the titles, you would be spoiled,
Mm,
So I thought I can't give it to you because you would figure something out. So
that's a good point. That's a good point. And so, I know that the story is written in like an alternative Greece. Is there anywhere or any kind of other like fantasy world that helped you inspire your world at all? Or is it mainly focused in, has like that Mediterranean kind of like Greek vibes?
yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what it is. I didn't really pull anything else into this. I wanted it to be very different. I mean, for me as a fantasy reader, what I've been seeing is a lot of the same lately. And I understand that, when people find something that works, you want it, you want to read more of it. I totally get it. but I felt like I was kept seeing, here's the young ingenue who's going to date the 500-year-old vampire, and she's the only, I thought I wanted something different, and so it was funny when people were conjecturing about Jason. He's a god. He's, this. I'm like, he's not any of those things, 'cause I thought he's not going to be 2,000 years old. So, uh, yeah, I really wanted to set something that felt unique to me, and it's probably not. There's probably a thousand books like this, but for me, this felt unique and something that I was going to focus on. So.
Mm. Have you ever been to Greece?
I haven't. I would love to go. I've been to Italy. I got to see like ruins and stuff, and that was amazing in Rome. But yeah, Greece is next.
Greece definitely has to be a bucket list for you. And then taking the book and then taking pictures with it, like,
Yes. Yes.
definitely. So do you have any like signings or events or anything planned for 2025 or 2026 coming up
I
where we can meet?
do. I'm doing Romance Out West in a couple of months. It's here in Utah. I'll be signing there. I am doing, gosh, Love in Vegas. That's right.
Hmm.
Yeah, out in Vegas. I'm doing that. That's the Wild and Windy group. And then the year after that, I'm doing Fangirl. Romance Readers has got their own event that they're starting.
Ooh,
I have, yeah, that's in 2026 out in Orlando.
ooh, that's
So
fun.
yeah, but yeah, I went to so many things last year because it's one of those things where people are like, "You want to come to this event?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah,
2024 is so far away, and then suddenly it was 2024, and I literally had 8 events last year, and I don't want to do that again. That's just it's too much. So. I'm really trying to limit it and just trying to go to some bigger ones. But like I would go to Book Bonanza and a Polycon, and so we'll see what's going to happen in the future and what I can sign up for. And I'm trying to do some more like fantasy and romantasy based ones. I think that would
yeah.
be fun. So I'm kind of looking to those, and I'm applying and just not hearing anything back. So hopefully we'll see.
Definitely check out Romantasy BookCon because they do have one in LA. Uh,
Yeah.
and they have one in Orlando. I went to the one in Orlando and it was really, really great. There were like I don't want to say 200 because I think it was 200 authors and vendors, but
Mhm.
there were quite a few, and I know a lot of like the indies that I follow have been like, oh, I'm going to Romantasy BookCon in LA, and so that might be cool to do,
Yeah, that'll be
So,
fun.
um, but yeah, I think Romantasy is just going to keep growing. Um,
Let's hope. I love it. I want
I
more of it.
do. I do too. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I always love hearing about the process and just knowing kind of like how you how you built this whole world and your story. So it really, really wonderful. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.